Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I'm pleased to be joined by Vance Lazar with Pioneer Architecture. Vance, thanks for joining me again on the show.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
So you're an architecture, long history in the industry. What if you were to give people a background, just introduce yourself? How would you set that up?
Sure. A traditional architect up into about COVID. And that's when I moved into what I call logistics, not industrial. I think you remember that conversation.
Mhm.
And since then have been burning, going, and loving every bit of it along the way. So it's just a totally different mind shift. I mean, just in general, when we talk about collaboration, right? You had collaboration in traditional architecture, but nothing like I've seen in logistics. Everybody's a team player. We're all on board. And that's actually what creates a successful project, right? So I've been doing it for 7 years now, and we are now licensed in 20 states. So we're all over the place.
Wow, that's great. So let's get into that. How would you differentiate logistics and logistics architecture from the traditional architecture that you were doing before?
Sure. I mean, if whether it was Tulane Baseball Stadium or, the Phase 4 Convention Center in New Orleans, or you get into, courthouses, city halls, res life, right? It's just a different thing. Obviously, everybody's kind of working together, but there's just a lot of finger pointing. That's what I found. There was the traditional model of that paradigm contractor, owner, architect that all worked together. Didn't really play out like that for so many years. And it started to, but when I jumped into logistics specifically, I was shocked because it truly was a collaborative effort. And it was something I'd always dreamed about. And in the last 6 years, it's been nothing but collaboration. And so it's just made my life, the firm, we're just excited. We're just pumped when we talk about it. So yeah, we're loving it.
Oh, that's awesome. How do you define what a logistics building is? Like how at a high level, and we'll get into more of it specifically, but if you're just talking to your neighbor and they ask, "Hey, Vance, what do you do?" And you say, "Well, I design logistics buildings." Well, and they ask, "Well, what is a logistics building?"
Sure. In our perspective, because again, I'm going to stay in, we like to stay in a lane, right? I'll use the example of a universal tool that's got a drill and a lathe, right? I mean, you can do that, but again, we don't do that. So when we say logistics, we're in the speculative build a suit, manufacturing kind of facilities. We don't go into the Home Depots, the Googles, the Amazons, because that's just a separate animal. Nor do we just don't want to go into data centers, cold storage. Again, we want to be focused, deliberate, and on our response. And again, we're providing a better service for our market, right? That's kind of what we do.
So what do one of these buildings look like? What's an average building that you're doing?
Oh, I mean, it can range anywhere from 80,000 to right now we're doing a 1.2 million in Indiana. So we're all over the place. Typically you'll find, right now, depending on the market, right, where you're talking about, a lot of the 160s to 200s. And then you find yourself more in that 600 range. And the next thing you know, it's jumping up to those big boys with a million two with future expansion, right? And that's another big topic out there. How do you expand in some of these buildings?
Yeah, and had a number of questions that I was going to ask you on this, and that's one of them on future proofing in industrial building. But I want to just set the stage even before we get there
Sure.
on these buildings themselves. So let's take one of those buildings, 160,000. Let's just say 200,000, just for round numbers.
Sure.
Comes to you and says, "We want to build a 200,000 square foot building. We've done all of our internal analysis, and we think that the market is ready for development of that size." If they just gave you that much information, do you then say, here's a plan on how I'm getting some feedback on the mic. Do you guys hear that?
I'm okay.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so developer comes to you with a 200,000 square foot requirement. Did they already have a detailed spec list at that point of saying we need this many dock doors, we need this many grade doors, we need the ceiling heights to be this high, or where do you come in to say, well, here's what we recommend based on other buildings that we've designed. Here's the ratio and how many dock doors we have, and here's what the ceiling heights are. because you mentioned collaboration is important.
Mhm.
How do you determine what that building's going to look like?
In an optimal situation, right, we are early on working with civil. Civil tends to get that front end developer, right, the initial approach. And those buildings typically aren't structurally spaced. The bays aren't correct, right? So we start manipulating that itself, right? Then when you get into developer specific, maybe, but for the most part, we're seeing, depending on the size. So if we're at the 200,000, you're probably in the 32, 34 foot clear, right? But again, if they're thinking a little long term, they may be going to 36, right? We're still seeing a lot of 40 foot in general, not a lot higher at this point. Still on the the 1.2s, we're still at 40 foot clear. But again, I think you're starting to look at utilities and things like that. But early on, best thing I can suggest is getting, and again, that goes to future proofing the building, right? Is to get everybody on board early, right? And more civil, structural, architectural. MEP is not, I mean, we do a lot of DB with that, but as in efforts, right? We want to get that early utility electrical. We're just huge on as far as collaboration with our own consultants, whether it's developer consultants, it really doesn't matter to us. We still find ourselves being the master coordinator, and we pride ourselves on it, not to have conflicts. Because again, when you talk about future proofing, well, or the added costs to projects, that's where that added product, that comes. So it's about that efficient bay spacing. Do we have that power? Dock door counts. So that's a great example. A lot of developers typically use 1 to 10,000. However, some developers like a Brookfield will just install all dock doors, but no pits, right? So it's pretty developer driven, depending on who you're talking to, and each one has their own standards, and or maybe they're working through those standards, right? And so early on, we start creating our own list for each developer. That way we know exactly what they want. So the next time they're coming in for a building, yes, we can immediately automatically kind of walk in and say, all right, if it's 200, yep, it's probably going to be 32. We look at the site. We want to identify again where that office location is, right? It shouldn't be on the backside. It needs to be visible. There's this idea of highway presence, and again, employee retention, and things that are making these buildings become um, more like a traditional building, not a industrial or a big box, right? And that may
Mhm.
go into what we talk about functionality and aesthetics, right? I mean, I could go on about that on that conversation as well. That's where you want
Well,
to go.
let's pivot there, because this is an area of great interest to me, is the tension between aesthetics and function. And that's an architectural philosophy that goes back hundreds of years, is form over function. And
Oh,
uh,
there's my guy, Frank Lloyd Wright. No, and
Frank Lloyd
I'm
Wright.
of that camp. I am of the camp of form follows function, because it's logistics. This is about in, out, right? Where this is about turnover, right? So, I mean, I think the mistake people make is treating functionality and aesthetics like they compete against each other, right? I think the best looking buildings are usually the ones that function extremely well, right? If trailer circulation's right, duct spacing's clean, the office placement's correct, you've got a strong structural rhythm, building proportions are right, the project naturally starts to evolve and look refined, right? I think a lot of the logistics designs, used to be decorate the box, right? Lipstick on a
Mhm.
pig. In today's developers realize and tends care about that image. They care about the labor attraction, visibility from the highway, right? Long-term asset perception. The key in my, if I just had to say one word, restraint, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you don't need unnecessary architectural moves. You need discipline and proportions, material, intentional lighting, right? Thoughtful office design, what that looks like. When you look at break rooms again, if you look at an older building, that I'd call it an older building, maybe a class B, even though it's probably still a 40-foot clear, right? You get into the automation, you walk into a break room and it's got an 8-foot ceiling and it just looks cramped. I walked into one that literally there were 40 people in it. It was so cramped you couldn't even walk in it. And it just looked like an uninviting environment. Now we're doing 2-story spaces, lots of windows. We're opening it up. Environmental affects how we work on the daily. So it's all impactful when it comes to that. I just think a good logistic architecture building is confident and it's not over designed, right? A lot of the developers specifically are starting to pay, not starting, well, I'd say more, um, have paid attention to branding. For example, Prologis,
Mhm.
they got their logo right there, right? You see it. It's real specific on branding. You look at, Derby, right? One of my favorites, right? Logistics center branding. The best idea ever created, Doug, right? You could look at IDI's branding. I think everybody knows when they see an IDI a building. It's the blue traditional, blended front entrance, right? Clarion, for example, is really pushing to start using a lot more red accents everywhere, right? Kind of hard to use a lot of red, a lot of blues. When you start doing those kind of colors in direct sunlight, they start fading, right? So you got to be real careful when it comes to coloring a building. I think the best ones are just bold, defining. But again, flexibility is probably the biggest um, common denominator between the two, right? Just can look over designed, in my opinion.
And that can be the difference between a project success over the lifetime versus a failure. If it's only designed for one user, well, what happens if that
That
one user leaves?
you're absolutely correct. And again, I think developers sometimes focus too heavily on the current tenant or no tenant or future one tenant, but are we really looking down three tenants, right? Those buildings really, maybe the challenge is no longer can we build a warehouse, right? It's can I build a warehouse that tenants want in 2030, 2035, right? And so that's when we're starting to look at that power integration. Again, we stay in that speculative manufacturing world. So we're not, up in the, 12, 18, 30,000 amps, right? So again, when we get into real specifics on these lower end buildings, we're still looking at 1,200, 2,000 amp services. And then again, when you get to more of a modern, let's just say 40-foot clear million square footer, you're probably in that 8 to 10,000 amps. When you start looking at some of the automation, conveyors, simple things like that, right? Not getting into that Google world, which can really, you go looking like an EV fleet. If you start going there, you're 2,000, 10,000 amps just for that, right? So where are we getting the power for that? That's probably one of the biggest constraints we're finding early on. We have to establish utility. That's like one of the first things. And again, that turns into, well, how much power are you going to give us? They need to see it. And on the speculative world, it's kind of hard to define what that or dictate what that may be, right? So typically that's kind of established based on building size. 500, you're probably going, 4,000 amps, one on each side. So, two and two. But when you get into the larger buildings, again, future updating for utilities, conduits is a big discussion, right? Making sure, because again, if you're not providing that, then again, now we're really looking at life cycle costs, and that's what I believe developers really need to start focusing more on instead of that initial value assessment, right? Yield for what you're putting out. I think it's really a life cycle
Yeah, I'm
issue.
glad you brought that up because I think that is imperative for people to be looking at right now. On the power side, I want to dig into this a little bit more because
Sure.
I think that this is a underappreciated risk in developing is that if you go and put up a 200,000 square foot building on spec right now and maybe you just get 2,000 amps of power in there, that might be sufficient for what the uses are today. But if we keep having this trend of electrification and we eventually see semi trucks that are electric and conveyor systems and robotics and automation and everything just has this power draw that maybe in 10 years from now we need to have double that power, triple that power. Very, very difficult to get a utility company to say, we'll commit to giving you 4,000 or
Exactly.
10,000 down the road when all you need right now is 2,000. What
That's
happens
right.
in those scenarios? What
We're
happens to the
dealing with it right now, whether it's a TI or even, a build a suit we're working on now. They just wanted to fight tooth and nail just to get more than that 2,000 amp service in a, what's that, 270,000 square foot building right now. And
Mhm.
again, they have automation going in. They did that. And again, in this specific case, it wasn't a ton. So we were able to work through that early on in a build a suit. But again, when you talk about a speculative, yeah, how are you going to do that? Right. But we're looking at another building right now where they're coming in and they need additional amp, and it's going to take 6 months to get that the transformer out there and the power integrated So it's a play, really, from the developer. How do you get that additional power in post construction, right? And initially, the initial setup, because that's one of the first things that's being brought up now is utilities, right? That electrical, definitely.
S- So, it, with that being known that we're likely just going to have more power demand on the tenant side going forward, and the grid is already running up against constraints, and if we keep developing more, and more other buildings need more power, it could come it could be problematic getting adequate power 10
Oh,
years
it's good.
from now. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
less than that, right? I mean, yeah,
yeah.
definitely 10 years for sure it's going to be a problem. And then where do you go, right? How are you getting that power? Are we going to start going on-site power for smaller distributions? Probably not, right? But you get into the million twos, or 2 millions, right? You need these bigger things. Where is that draw coming from? And again, it's that initial conversation, whether power can even be done, or get there, or are we looking at on-site, some type of on-site utility? I think that's probably where it's going to end up going, and that's probably more than 10, 15 years out, but I definitely seeing that's probably the direction. I just don't know where. Again, you start adding all the data centers and all the things that are
Mhm.
consuming all of that. Where does that speculative, where does that, that simple box kind of go, right? I mean, because you've got to worry about it. So it's just become usually the first question, honestly, is where with utilities.
So a lot of buildings right now are solar ready. If they're not being built with
I'm
solar
finding more
already,
and
but it's
more.
solar
Yeah,
ready.
but all through COVID, I did one building out of the 18 during COVID that was solar ready. But
Only
now we're
one.
definitely,
Wow.
yeah, we're finding now more and more people need to include that 5 pounds per square foot, right? To add that solar capability, whether or not, again, flexibility. If you don't provide it, tenant comes in and they want to have solar. Well, now what are we doing? You might not get your space leased. So they've got to become more flexible. Developers need to become more flexible, because again, they'll just go find the next person that did it right.
Yeah, I'm cynical on solar from the green energy standpoint because I think once you account for the full life cycle of solar, there's a lot more uh, negatives that aren't
Not
accounted
disagreeing.
for in the public purview.
I
So
agree.
I'm cynical on it being a green energy, but I do think that it's energy. So is that a potential way for building owners to offset this problem? Is if they do fill the roof with solar panels at some point down the road, they can at least bring in more power in addition to what they already have. Is that a viable option?
I think it's a viable option, depending on what power specific we're talking, right? Office, things like that, to supplement some of that daytime use. Yeah, I think solar is definitely an option. Is it the cleanest and most efficient? No, I don't think we're there yet, but we're better than we were 5 years ago. So
Mhm.
I think solar, again, I just bought a full Blue Eddy duct for myself that has solar panels to offset some of the traditional stuff that I do. I've got, you know, for those panels out there, and I'm supplementing some of my local energy just because the rates are going up, right? Why not? It's free. So
Absolutely.
it's again ROI, right? Is when are you going to see it? And it'll take a little while, but again, I boondock camp and do some other things too. So it's kind of a twofer for me.
Yeah, makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
that I think that's a great thing for developers to be considering right now is having it solar ready, even if you're not building it for if you're not putting solar actively on right now. And
Mhm.
Prologis is a good example of one that is. Prologis is being very aggressive on solar, and I always use them as the bellwether. I think anything that Prologis does is going to trickle down to the rest of the industry at some point. So if they're doing it, if they're already being proactive on this and doing it, I think we should all be paying attention. And I think that is one great design consideration. What else? What else? If you were to put on your
Well, I mean,
wizard
yeah,
hat,
no,
what?
sure. Let's look at the traditional BAS or building, say, the building systems, right? And that just typically dealt with your HVAC, and it might got into, kind of that lighting controls, right? Early on, that's kind of what we saw in those 90s, right? The focus there was people first, automation second. Right. I mean, it's kind of just a different story. Now we're just increasing. We're seeing the tenants ask about, uh, can the building support robotics and automation? Early on, they're asking that in a build a suit, right? Can it handle the autonomous movement, right? Is the slab designed for automation? That's another big one, right? Again, going back to power infrastructure, is it scalable, right? Is that column-based spacing, right? It's all things that all need to be looked at early on, because if not, I just feel those projects are not doomed for failure. But again, somebody's gonna pay for it on the back end, and so our approach is to get it all out on the table as early as possible. What is that developer looking for? 3 tenants down? Or are they not looking at 3 tenants down and they're just trying to put a speculative build? Again, I've done speculative builds with offices that are 4,000 square feet, only for that tenant to come in and rip that thing out and put their own office in. That's slightly inefficient.
Mhm.
But at the time, they were able to do it. That was a lot more during COVID, but we're not seeing that as much now. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of calls. Um, so it's just interesting to see how that has shifted. Now, when we get to from the '90s, it was that. I think we're now into the BEMS, the building energy kind of system, where we're now integrating a lot more. Right, it's just not HVAC and electrical. Right, we're monitoring, whether it's the solar, right, that battery storage. Right, I mean, there's energy monitoring. A 500,000 square building was fine at 1,200 to 2,000 amps. That same building with automation goes to 6 to 12,000, right? And where's that going? So most spec warehouses still relatively basic monitoring systems, but future, I would completely expect to see BIMs, or that management system, be fully integrated in building as more of a common path. Because again, what does that do, right? I mean, you're reducing your overall cost. You're reducing the energy consumption, hopefully reducing some pollution, maintaining, maintenance and repair costs, just improving the comfortability for the building users. So I just think that is one definitely thing in the future. It's going to become just as common as the SFR sprinklers. That's my opinion, where that's going to go. Because then again, it's all inclusive about energy modeling, right? And how we're going to use it, exploit it, take advantage of it. Because I think there is some advantage to it all, right? And just kind of going in straight. And it's kind of the conversation of incandescent to fluorescent to LED. It's
That's
just
right.
a progressive path that ultimately I believe will just become more standard in buildings. And that's how we can maybe affect some of those costs as far as energy and how we deal with it. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. You alluded to one thing, and it wasn't originally on the questions that I had, but I'd love to get your thoughts on the floors themselves, because
sure.
I think anybody in the industrial space that's been in it, even for a little bit, would have an understanding that the column spacing is important, the ceiling height is important, the loading is important,
Mhm.
power is important. But one thing that doesn't get a whole lot of coverage is the floor itself. And anybody that's been through a 40-year-old industrial building knows that there's going to be cracks and heaves, and the forklifts are almost need to be 4x4s to get over some of these.
Jumping over these armored. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
now we need to have in a lot of these buildings, you need to have super flat floors. How would you describe that, or the need for that in the first place, on why we need to have such low tolerance for cracks and unevenness in the flooring?
Yeah, the structural slabs very important. I think regardless of automation, etc. I'll dive into a quick story, and I did it last time. Alan Face he's Mr. Concrete, right? He's the guy that created the F meter, and so he and I have had many conversations all through COVID on why it's so important to have a flat slab, and the rules and restrictions on how we do a lot of that is very important, right? I mean, again, I came into a time where ductile was a big hitter, right? Again, less controlled joints, liked it, but again, had some issues. But again, still proponent of it, but I find it less common now than just your conventional slab, right? But when you get into dowel baskets, and again, one of the big things that I find is the coordination effort of sanitary cleanouts, running right on a control joint. Who in their right mind, why don't we just place the control joints? Again, Revit, it's a tool, right? And again, once I praise Selena, it shows up on those. Why would we not include everything in our office that we do is 3D? So when we walk around, we do full real-time visualization throughout the entire process. We're seeing the control joints from day, schematic, let's call it, right? It's not rocket science. Ultimately, it's a mathematical equation. The entire building really is. And again, going back to how we interact, I mean, we've developed our own proprietary software early on, as far as like the test fit conversation you were bringing up.
Hmm.
When we had that conversation early on, we were in the middle of that, and we've now far succeeded that. And we literally will have developers. They may not have a civil on board, right? And say, what can fit? I think you actually asked me this last time. You're like, what if we've got 300 acres? How many? It's like, well, what's the form of the site, right? So now we grab we can grab a site plan, PDF, whatever, Google Maps. We'll overlay a building, and we can have these test fits done within a day. And then on top of that, I just showed you some of those marketing images that we're now creating, which really looks like the building's already been built. It's crazy how AI. I mean, again, it's been a long road to get there with prompts and specific. Now we've got it nailed down with Revit and Photoshop and all the things that on the front end marketing perspective, it's a game changer, and that's also helped. I know I've kind of diverged a little bit, but that's a big time game changer, because a lot of them aren't seeing that, and now they're seeing it from us, and now it's become like, well, why isn't anybody else doing that? It's like, yeah, I don't know. They should be, right? And that's when you go back to that traditional architecture comment. I was part of the process, right? I mean, and again, I have a master, I think I told you last time, I have a master's degree in computer visualization back in 97. So I've been doing this forever. So I was in a world where that's all I did. I had my own different company, just doing 3D visualization for traditional architects, post New Orleans. And then now coming back and having my own firm doing it again. I get to focus on that. I'm still high level marketing and stuff, and the other guys are just project managing, but I get to jump back into that. And literally, we got the goggles on, we're reviewing it, we're change that color, do this, no, whatever it might be. It's basically built before we've laid anything, before we've, created the site. It's just an amazing tool overall. And again, that just goes back to the overall collaboration. That again, it's just amazing.
How has AI changed architecture in the last few years that it's grown and developed?
Double-edged sword. I mean, honestly, I feel like a lot of, again, I'm coming from a perspective where I had to build a door, right? I had to build hardware. Like now I just drop and drag and it's nice and easy. If we consider that AI, maybe, right? As far as within Revit, the tools that we use. But again, on the front end, anybody can do a sketch napkin now, throw it on a website, blam, and it's a photorealistic rendering, right? Well, and I'm not going to say that really happens in logistics, but I think it does happen traditionally, right? And whether that be a skyscraper, whatever, doesn't mean it actually can be constructed. I think that's where the pitfall is with a lot of the AI, right? It's a pretty picture, and you just got to use it as exactly that. But is it functional? Does it work, right? And that's where we take, again, our research development, how you want to call it. We've created things now that we can look at this immediately, get feedback, and we're just back and forth constantly with the developer. And again, once we've had multiple buildings, like a Core 5, right, or an IDI, somebody that we know exactly what they want, it's point and shoot for the most part, right? And again, that's the fun part of that, because then we're really just honestly focused on how can we make this thing without a change order. And again, we're pretty proud of it. We don't have many on the architectural side, just on napkin, because we focus so hard on that collaboration integration. We actually go in, for example, I'll do an example on electrical, right? We have no reason to go model any of that electrical, right? We do. We go place all the receptacles, we place the lights, we put the cabinets in along the dock walls. We want to show interior elevations. We want to show the integration, how that cabinet is going to work with a door, a dock door, right? You get to the left side of the, controls of an equipment. It's on the left-hand side of the door. And all of a sudden I've seen it where they put an electrical cabinet right in the middle of a knockout. Well, that doesn't really work, guys, because now we've deleted a position. What are you doing? So those are some of the things that we'll find conflicts immediately. And again, we tend to work with a lot of dedicated logistic consultants. So we're finding that less and less. But again, some of those are DB. So in that case, we just take the responsibility. We do that. We do the HVAC, structural. We're modeling the footings. We're modeling it all if it's not modeled already. And again, showing multiple building sections and interior elevation. All those things are such an important part of the story, right? Because again, architecture was a story to show or to define what a building, how it's constructed, what it looks like, right? And again, logistics, or I will say in the industrial market, right? It was originally on, you could do it on a napkin and handshake and it was done, right? Couple, 5 sheets and you were good to go. Not anymore. Not, at least not in our farm. We just find it too, it's negligible. Not negligible. It's just we have the ability. So why aren't you doing it? Right. And again, it's about perception. Some architects want to sit there and act like, oh my gosh, it takes that long. It's a click, click, and I have a section. Now there's detailing that has to happen with it, right? It's all effort, but it's not like it used to be where we're drawing our lines and doing it. So those stories that we're telling through these building sections, right? Parapet heights, how does that integrate the large 1416 dock, the drive and ramp? How is that interacting with that clear story? It all interacts. And so we're finding people are just going, wow, you guys are providing that many more drawings. And it's not build a suit. That's speculative, right? And so then you get to the build a suit with automation, whether hopefully we can get some of that stuff modeled, but we'll actually go in and start modeling some of that just for the interactive. So that client in a build a suit sees exactly what they're getting. Right. It's just an interesting perspective that, again, we pride ourselves. I don't think that many people are doing that yet. So good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll
Right.
put a video at the end of this as well that shows some of your work, which I think take a look at it because it's awesome. I think what you guys are doing is at the cutting edge of architecture in terms of helping developers and their future tenants really understand what it is. And conceptually, it's more important than ever because expectations have risen. You can't
Oh,
just
it's
go and show
amazing.
somebody.
It's amazing. So I'll give you one perfect example of a TI we did. We walked in, they picked the colors, and I'm going to show them, right? So I show them, they're like, I saw it first. And I was like, ooh, that's pretty dark. It was a darker beige interior color. And I was like, not with the colors. So I just showed them. I can actually, within a program we use, Twin Motion. It's an Autodesk product, right? And what we can do is we can actually have configurations to where we actually can click a button and just change the look on the fly.
Mm.
And they look and they say, oh yeah, that's too dark. No, thank you so much. That, again, unless you're not going to find that out till the paint's on the wall and they're like, it's too damn dark. Simple things like that. I mean, that goes back to employee retention. Again, going back to some of these, just a simple restroom, right? A warehouse restroom can be as prison-like as you want it to be, or you can put slight, small finishes, LVT floor. Wow, it's not that much money. You get an LVT at $3 a square foot in, a 200 square foot space, and it truly changes the opinion. And I've talked to these employees, right? I've actually had a conversation that did this affect you? Or is it affecting you? Do these things change it? When you talk about a break room, for example, why are we not slapping USBs at every single receptacle? Everybody wants to charge the phone or on their phone, or right. My kid's a perfect example. He lives on the phone, right? And so they all want to charge their phone. So whether you're including those USBs in lockers, right, behind the locker room and integrating that, there's just different things. Employee amenities are, in my opinion, going to be the next strong suit. And I've been preaching it for 3 years, but I more and more we're seeing the developers going, yeah, I see what you're saying. They're really starting to pick that up. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that employees drive the companies, which the companies then rent the space and drive the building value. They're all interconnected. So having happy employees is a great place to start. And there's not a lot of I shouldn't say not a lot because I'm sure that there are many, but not enough that are saying let's not look at this building as we need sprinklers for code or we need this many doors, but those little things, they go
Those are
such a
the
long
givens
way.
now. Yeah. And again, it goes, those are the givens. And
Mhm.
now you have to look past it. You have to, because again, employees will leave, name a person that works in a prison that likes it. Right. I mean, probably not, but those simple little, whether it's color, graphics, simple little things that happen. Now we're getting into the build suits or whatever, right? I'm not speculative world, but all those things definitely impact a person's environment and how they feel and interact. It just does. It's proven in psychology. And hopefully we're just going that route in logistics. And I'm pushing it, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you are. So there's definitely a lot of things that developers should be paying attention to and spending money on. Have you noticed anything that developers are spending money on that is perhaps not the best use of money or inefficient?
Without being a design critic, I see a lot of applique. I'm going to put it that way, right? I see a lot of large storefront up top from the entrances that unfortunately will have tint and blackout curtains on the back.
Mhm.
That's pretty inefficient. I get it from the exterior look. And again, that's maybe a branding idea that tends to happen. But if we're going to talk about inefficiency, I mean, you're spending a lot of money on a storefront system that's not being used, right? Why aren't you spandreling it? Well, again, I think um, form follows function, right? I'm more of a fan of eclectic design, not kind of, hey, what's the hippest, hottest slanted column in front of a building. And I don't mean any disrespect to any architect that's ever done that. I'm just saying I find some of that stuff just will start looking dated. And so again, when I'd rather focus on the functionality. I'd rather focus on, circulation, dock door counts. Are we good? Have we thought about, generator locations, all these different things that really are much more important than, in my opinion, everyone's going to drive by and they want to see the aesthetic. I get it. But again, it's that fighting balance between aesthetic and function. And I think the easiest way to do it is to not over design. It's about restraint. And right. And certain developers are just going to push, hey, I want the full story. And they don't care. Okay, you pick it, we'll stick it, right? I mean, if that's what they want, that's what we're going to give them. But at the same time, I don't or have not yet taken my architectural hat off in this logistics world, right? Again, simple things like aligning lights and HVAC in those remote restrooms, and it's just haphazardly and it just gets installed, drives me insane because, and I know I'm not the only one that looks up and says, "What the hell's going on?" But it's a subliminal feeling that truly makes a difference. And so that's the one thing I've taken obviously from my old world into the new world. And I'm finding developers are now appreciating that because they're hearing it from their tenant side, right? In these
Mm.
future other builds or people coming in. Where that 1.2 we're looking at, there's 5 or 6 tenants already looking and we're not vertical. So and they're looking at those employee amenities. So part of that is us again walking in, doing animation, showing them the finishes, showing them what it's going to look like, seeing everything as it's real life, walking through. That helps them understand what the space is going to look like. It starts opening their mind of, oh, what can we do with the space? And then that further develops a dialogue. Hey, maybe we just don't want a white box interior. Maybe we do want some simple things like fur downs or whatever it might be to create space rather than just providing an empty box where people go work. I think it's so much more than that. It needs to be more than that.
No, well said. Well, little bit of a tangent.
Sure.
Drone deliveries. Is this on anybody's radar right now? And just to tee it up, if anyone isn't familiar with it, there's Amazon is rolling out a lot more options now, and for that, and other retailers are. I believe Papa John's or one of the pizza companies just delivered a pizza by
Oh, really?
drone, it's I'd say it's a very, very, very small percentage of deliveries are happening by drone right now. So it's not big enough to warrant retrofits at the current stage. But is that on any developer's radar that this could be something that develops and expands, and they need to account for it somehow?
In general, I'm going to agree that it's probably going to be out there, right? It's going to become more popular. I mean, we all see, I mean, I've got drones flying over me all the time from the local Walmart right here that just does it. And it's now going to my twin brother's house, who's 3 miles away that didn't do it. So that's just expanding on a local level. We don't live in that Amazon Google world. We don't live in a Home Depot world. We live in that speculative build to suit. So I couldn't really address it, but I kind of agree with where you're going with it. I think eventually it's going to happen. So I do believe it's down the pipeline. We just haven't seen it yet on in what we specifically do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the even just getting authority to do it is you need to be one of the major companies that can spend that have lobbying power and the ability to influence regulations to even get permission to do this. So I can't start a company and start delivering with drones tomorrow. It's just not going to happen, and that goes for the majority of companies out there. So it's before it's commercially available at scale, I think it's many years out, but it'll probably come in some shape or form where regulations adapt and
I think,
technology advances.
it could, but again, that goes back to, being flexible, providing the
Hmm.
conduit at least, right, to where maybe that may exist if they're thinking about it, right? You may not be providing the power lines to it, just right, just going to step it up and pull lines later. But the idea is definitely, I think, again, that goes back to another flexible idea that needs to start being thought about it. But yeah, is it being brought up? Not in my world right now. But
Yeah.
it's a good point, it really is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow because it's just anytime you get a new technology like that where drones are flying over us and dropping something into our yard is it's almost seems science fiction, but yeah, it's fascinating on that.
It's interesting that I just thought about something else. A lot of as we know, a lot of the logistics buildings are centered near corridors and airports, right? So then that drone capability, I wonder where that leads to with restricted airspace, etc. But when you get out to these sub markets and stuff, I definitely agree with you that being probably coming down the pike. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be something that I'm following pretty closely.
Definitely.
Anything that you're seeing on the autonomous driver side where buildings, and I think this is also very, very early, this might even be earlier than drones, but autonomous vehicles to the point where our parking lots, this is thinking really far out, but I'm just trying to put on my wizard hat to look extrapolate out into the future. If
Mhm.
autonomous vehicles get to the level where they're much more common, what happens? Do we need as much parking space for vehicles if everyone's just getting dropped off and the vehicle goes on to somewhere else? And then same with semi trucks. If Tesla's rolling out theirs, and it's still a very, very small percentage of the overall global fleet, but it's still developing. Does that
Mhm.
change how buildings are going to need to be uh, adapted for it? And if nothing else, just power, because these semi truck, if they're unloading, they might want to be powered, charged at the same time, or do vehicles charging? Like, is that on the radar yet, or is that still too
It
far
is.
out?
No, it is, and I'm working on a specific build a suit that absolutely has future EV ready autonomous driving, and so we're providing again conduit for that. They're not jumping into it, but it's definitely been part of the conversation from the very beginning. And we have a large yard already kind of established for that area, as well as those spaces. Currently, they'll just be used for kind of a storage space, like traditional. But we've allocated an area that will become that those spaces. So yes,
Hmm.
it's definitely becoming online. When and if it happens, right? That's the $1 million question. But we are providing massive amount. I mean, I think we've got 8 2-inch conduits going out there right now.
Hmm.
So it's definitely being thought about and definitely being delivered, the conduit part.
Dealing with so many different developers, there must be a spectrum of appetite for this type of change where I'm assuming there's some developers that are just saying, "This is what we want. This is what the market needs right now." It's a traditional in today's standards, but it's nothing unexpected. And then on the other end, you're probably going to have some that are saying it needs to be solar ready. We need to have these EV spots. We need to have this big conduit going out, and they're very forward thinking. Is
Yes.
that have you noticed any reason on why one developer would think so much differently than the other? It's just come down to personality
That's a
or
good question. I know Core 5 up in Cincinnati specifically has always included EV charging, right?
Hmm,
Installed, not just conduit. Some of the others will just provide the conduit. I definitely think they're considering it. It's just I think it's developer specific right now. I mean, I can say that probably as a general rule. I don't find a lot of people, hey, what's your thoughts on it on the EV? Because they probably already have a perspective. So they may say, yeah, we're just going to provide the conduit or we're thinking about it, 8 spots, whatever it might be, right? You get into California, It's not my world. It's the one state I'm not, I was born and raised there, but it's not a state I'm going to go practice in just because it's just so complex. But right now, a lot of the developers think EV, provide conduit for the most part, and then there's some that are just dedicated straight up. We're going to do a certain count, and it's just installed from day one. But then again, we're also having problems in some of those. If those have not been leased, they're stealing that copper and taking those things. So now they're providing locks, and they're trying to remove some of that stuff because of vandalism, right? That whole copper experience has never been fun for anybody, especially those contractors on site, right? We've dealt with that. But we're now seeing people take some of those chargers, which is not a good thing. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, well, there'll never be a shortage of thieves trying to be opportunistic ever.
True story. True story.
So
yeah.
That's something we're always going to have to deal with. I think that there's an interesting tangent here, though, where we're coming at this from the approach of the original architecture and the developer, and I think that we've focused mostly on that, which is key. And that's the reason that buildings get built, is someone like you gets involved with the developer. What's interesting is that a lot of these developers are merchant developers, in the sense that they'll build it on behalf of somebody else, or they'll build it, lease it up, stabilize it, and sell it. That's a
Absolutely.
very common business model, which means that there's an end user, an end buyer. And that could be a private individual, it could be a family office, it could be a big corporation, but somebody is buying these. So the developer might not have as much incentive to go and future-proof the buildings if they're only concerned with lease up and then selling it. And that's the business model. I'm not denigrating that by any means. And it's a business. Right. People make decisions and prioritize different things.
Dollars and cents.
Dollars and cents. But what if somebody's buying a property, are you going, and I'm asking this hypothetically or rhetorically, but are you going through the same exercise of saying, an architectural exercise of saying, yes, this building is future proofed. It does have the ability to add solar down the road. It does have the ability to add EV charging. It does have the ability to pull in more power. This has already been thought of, and that doesn't necessarily get reflected in a sale price, because if one buyer doesn't consider it,
they don't care.
They don't care.
Two tenants down, though, right? That's the difference. So again, flexibility, and again, I do those conversations. I mean, we've got a startup list of things. If we don't know the developer, that we're asking those questions, and you just brought up many of those questions, right? I mean, they're just common sense questions, and how they may have thought about it, they may not have thought about it, or they're just like, yeah, not happening. So it's just, again, I think it's developer driven, but if they're all considering it, even if I've asked them before, I'm going to ask again, because if things changed 6 months ago, maybe a different philosophy, they may have turned their tide and said, you know what, we really do need to start looking downstream. I can use an example. Mount Comfort was it was 1.2 million square footer. Didn't get leased forever, right? And some of that issue, right? So what was the issue? Why did it not, right? So future tenants, what didn't happen? Maybe it was energy. Maybe it was employment, right? It's a game. It's not a game. It's just, hopefully they are considering it. And if they're not, we're going to let them know about it. And again, if they choose to do it, great. If they choose not to do it, great. But we're still going to keep asking those questions.
Is that a consulting service that you guys offer? If someone was going to buy a building and they just wanted to say, I want to make sure that I'm to the best of my ability covering future exposure on this. Is that a service you guys offer, where you'd say, well, let's run through this and say, here's potentially a spot where this building lacks, or here's some areas where you think this is good? Do you guys do that?
We will, but I think it's more of a collaborative effort. Again, going back to, when you get into power, I'm not a power guy, right? I'm not an electrical engineer. So for me to get into that, but again, those dedicated people, we all come with, kind of come in a meeting, and we're going to ask those questions pre-construction, post-construction, whether it's a tenant after, before TI, build a suit, whatever. All of those questions are being addressed. And yes, there's 2 buildings right now that we're looking at for that same exact thing. So yes, it's not a common practice for us, but again, it's usually on that front end of every conversation when we start looking at a building.
I hear your doorbell. Do you want to grab that and we could always cut this out and
That's my clock. It's just my
oh,
clock
is it?
ringing.
Okay. Oh yeah, I go. I guess we're at the top of the hour here. I'm a big fan of yours, Vance, as you know, and I hope people reach out to you to discuss this going forward because I think that the one thing in real estate is that you can ask questions and get answers, and that's key. But if you don't even know what questions to ask, you're never going to get the answer. So I'm just a big believer that you need to have people in your corner that are looking at your potential blind spots to at least prompt you to say, here's some questions that we think are worth asking. And if you can't figure it out, being power as an example, let's ask the question though, and let's get an answer.
Yeah,
And I
and again, I totally agree. And again, it's having those dedicated people knowing that answer beforehand, right? Because you bring the right
Mhm.
people to the table. That's just the key factor there. And so again, yes, I'm so on board with what you're saying, and it really should be a tenet of logistic architecture at this point. And hopefully we'll get there. And again, I'm happy to help any other firms on that level, right? Again, it's all a collaborative effort. I think as a community, we need to push forward with that idea. I do.
Yeah, well, that was a great way to end. We'll put a link to your website and to your LinkedIn in the show notes, and then stay tuned. Right after this, we're going to put the video that you have showcasing some of the projects that you've worked on, which is fascinating. So we'll have that on after. But Vance, just wanted to thank you for sharing all your insights, and it's great being connected over the last few years that we have, and I look forward
Definitely.
to continuing the relationship.
Absolutely, Chad. It was a pleasure to be on. Thank you.
There's a powerful shift happening in real estate. The logistics architecture community doesn't design heavy manufacturing plants, data centers, energy substations, refineries, or foundries. Those aren't logistics, and they're not us. At Pioneer Architecture, we focus exclusively on the real backbone of supply chains, logistics spaces and outdoor storage, nothing else. It's not about flashy design or trends. It's about smarter strategy, purposeful planning, and operational efficiency. Logistics isn't part of what we do. It's the only thing we do. We partner with developers on build to suit, speculative design, tenant infill and improvements projects, and logistics outdoor storage and flex spaces. From large distribution centers to complex yards, these are the facilities powering tomorrow's growth. And this isn't just design, it's true collaboration. We take full responsibility for alignment. Civil, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural coordination. Because your time is valuable and every detail counts. Our logistics-based consultants mean fewer RFIs, fewer change orders, smoother projects. We understand that every square foot, dock door, power drop, and turning radius matters. We bring deep logistics fluency, constructability-first mindset, relentless speed to execution. We're licensed in 12 states and growing, supporting logistics developers across the United States. We thrive in complexity. Efficient site plans, scalable warehouse solutions, automation-ready power strategies, flexible entitlements and permitting. And when the right tools didn't exist in Revit, we built them. Custom proprietary plugins, streamlining workflows and making smarter decisions. We provide interactive walkthroughs from early stages of schematic to photorealistic walkthroughs as part of our services throughout the design process. And no, we don't charge extra for this. It's all inclusive. From test fits to CD sets to construction turnover, we think like developers. We design like partners. We move fast and take ownership from day one. We're not just a vendor, we're your logistics asset. Collaborative, responsible, results driven. Come visualize and experience the difference. Let's build it together.